For decades, UFO disclosure was treated like a question of belief. Did you believe the witness? Did you believe the photograph? Did you believe the whistleblower? Did you believe the government was hiding something? But the modern UAP era is changing the question. Now, the issue is moving through Congress, through defense legislation, through whistleblower protection bills, through oversight hearings, through classified briefings, through demands for video files, through requests to defense contractors, through declassification systems, through the machinery of law. And that matters, because once UFO disclosure becomes legislation, it stops being only a cultural debate. It becomes a question of public rights. Who owns the records? Who controls the evidence? Who protects whistleblowers? Who briefs Congress? Who reviews classified programs? Who decides what the public is allowed to know? And what happens when lawmakers begin treating UAP not as mythology, not as science fiction, not as internet speculation, but as an oversight problem? Today we're investigating the latest legislative movements around UAP disclosure, not just what Congress is doing, but what it means for the public. Because the next phase of disclosure may not arrive as a single dramatic announcement. It may arrive through amendments, hearings, subpoenas, reporting requirements, whistleblower protections, declassification rules, and pressure on agencies that have spent decades operating behind classified walls. Welcome to UFO to UAP, I'm your host Matt Tones, and today we're asking one central question. Is UAP disclosure becoming a law? Let's begin. For most of modern history, the UFO subject lived outside the official mainstream. It was investigated, denied, categorized, ridiculed, archived, reopened, reframed, and then buried again. There were government projects, there were Air Force investigations, there were congressional questions, there were intelligence assessments, there were public hearings. But for the average listener, the pattern was familiar. A case would emerge, public interest would rise, officials would respond carefully, and files would remain incomplete. The subject would drift back into uncertainty. That is what makes the current moment different. The UAP issue is no longer only being pushed from outside the system, it's now being fought inside the system. Inside Congress, inside defense authorization bills, inside oversight committees, inside legislation aimed at forcing agencies to report more, preserve more, disclose more, and protect the people who come forward. This is not the same as proof. It is not the same as full disclosure. It does not mean every claim is true. It does not mean every whistleblower allegation has been verified. It does not mean the government is about to reveal the origin of every unidentified object. But it does mean something very important. The UAP issue has become serious enough that lawmakers are trying to write rules around it. And when governments write rules around a subject, they're acknowledging that the subject has institutional weight. This is where we are right now. UAP is no longer only an unexplained aerial phenomenon, it is a legislative phenomenon, a records problem, a classification problem, a whistleblower problem, a defense oversight problem, a public trust problem, and potentially a constitutional problem. Because Congress has a basic role in the American system, oversight, it is supposed to know what taxpayer money is being used for. It is supposed to know whether agencies are following the law. It is supposed to know whether programs are operating beyond proper authorization. It is supposed to know whether classified systems are being used to avoid accountability. That is why UAP disclosure has moved into legislative territory, not because Congress has solved the mystery, but because Congress appears increasingly concerned that the normal mechanisms of oversight may not be enough. That is the first major point. The latest legislative movements are not just about aliens. They are about accountability. They're about whether government agencies, intelligence officers, defense contractors, military commands, and classified programs can be compelled to provide information when elected representatives ask for it. That is a much bigger issue than UFO culture. It goes directly to public trust. Because if the public believes agencies can hide information indefinitely, even from Congress, then the UAP mystery becomes part of a larger democratic concern. Who controls secret knowledge? Who watches the watchers? Who decides when secrecy protects national security and when secrecy protects institutions from embarrassment? That is why this episode matters. Question for you. Do you think UAP disclosure is mainly about finding out what these objects are, or is it about whether the public can trust government institutions? Add your answer in the comments because that question shapes how we interpret every legislative move. Now let's look at the first major legislative track, the UAP Disclosure Act movement. Representative Eric Burleson introduced the UAP Disclosure Act of 2025 as an amendment to the fiscal year 2026 National Defense Authorization Act. The purpose was to increase transparency around government records related to UAP. That phrase sounds simple, government records related to UAP. But think about what that could include. Military reports, pilot testimony, radar data, satellite records, sensor logs, video files, photographs, historical documents, intelligence assessments, contractor-held material, recovered objects if any exist, communications between agencies, internal memos, declassification reviews, Arrow case files, congressional briefings, records that may be scattered across decades and across multiple parts of government. The challenge is that UAP information is rarely sitting in one clean folder. It may be spread across the military, intelligence agencies, civilian agencies, contractors, archives, classified systems, and even old paper records. That is one reason disclosure is difficult. The public often imagines a single vault. Open the vault, release the files, and the truth comes out. But the reality may be far more fragmented. The records may not be centralized. The classification markings may differ. The agencies may disagree about ownership. Some files may contain sensitive sensor data. Some may involve foreign intelligence. Some may involve operational military locations. Some may include names or methods that cannot easily be released. Some may have been lost, misfiled, overclassified, or never properly preserved. And this is why legislation matters, because without legal requirements, agencies can say the process is too complex. They can say records are scattered. They can say classification prevents release. They can say more review is needed. They can delay. They can narrow requests. They can hand over summaries instead of underlying data. Legislation is Congress attempting to change that balance. It is Congress saying, no, this topic cannot remain permanently trapped inside bureaucratic uncertainty. If records exist, they must be identified. If they are classified, there must be a pathway to review them. If they involve public interest, the public must eventually receive more than vague statements. That is the promise of UAP disclosure legislation. But there is also a problem. A bill or amendment is only as powerful as what survives the legislative process. UAP disclosure advocates know this very well. Past disclosure efforts have often entered Congress with strong language, only to be narrowed, diluted, revised, or completely removed during negotiation. That matters because the final law is what counts, not the press release, not the proposed amendment, not the original draft, the final language, what agencies are actually required to do, what deadlines they must meet, what records they must search, what penalties exist for non-compliance, what authority Congress has if agencies refuse, what role contractors play, what information remains exempt. This is why the public should not simply celebrate every legislative announcement. The public should read the final text, because in Washington, one word can change everything. May, shall, relevant, responsive, classified, unresolved, possession, control, custody. Each term matters. A law that says an agency may release records is very different from one that says it shall release records. A law that covers records in government possession may be different from one that covers records in government control, especially if contractors are involved. A law that requires a briefing to Congress is not the same as a law requiring public release. And a law that allows broad national security exemptions may leave the most important material hidden. And that is why UAP disclosure legislation must be judged very carefully, not by its ambition, by its enforceability. Now, the second major legislative movement involves the fiscal year 2020 National Defense Authorization Act. The NDAA is one of the most important pieces of legislation in the US government because it sets defense policy. And UAP provisions inside the NDAA matter because they embed the issue directly inside the defense oversight system. One major provision requires the Pentagon to brief lawmakers on UAP intercepts involving North American Aerospace Defense Command and United States Northern Command. That matters. NORAD and NORTHCOM are not fringing institutions. They are central to the defense of North American airspace. If Congress is asking for information about UAP intercepts connected to these commands, the issue is being treated as an airspace security matter, not just a curiosity, not just a strange light in the sky, but an intercept. And that word matters. An intercept implies military response. It implies an object or event that triggered operational attention. It implies procedures, protocols, data collection, command decisions, potential risk, and congressional interest. The NDAA provision reportedly asks for information including the number, location, and nature of intercepts, along with procedures, protocols, and data collected or analyzed. That is significant because Congress is not just asking, did something happen? Congress is asking, how many times did it happen? Where did it happen? What was the nature of the event? What procedures were followed? What data was collected? What analysis was conducted? Those are all the right questions because UAP disclosure cannot rely on witness testimony. It needs patterns, locations, dates, sensor records, decision pathways, data quality, and operational context. If UAP events are happening in restricted or defended airspace, Congress needs to know whether the military response is consistent, documented, and properly reviewed. For the public, this means the UAP issue is being pulled deeper into the oversight architecture. And that is good. But again, there is a limitation. A briefing to Congress does not necessarily mean disclosure to the public. This is one of the most important distinctions in the entire episode. Congressional disclosure is not public disclosure. Lawmakers may receive classified briefings. They may see more than the public sees. They may understand more than they're allowed to say. They may be told about cases, data, programs, or procedures that remain hidden behind classification. That can improve oversight, but it does not automatically build public trust. The public may still see only a summary, a redacted report, a vague statement, a carefully worded acknowledgement. This is why the public must watch the gap between what Congress learns and what citizens receive, because disclosure can move inside government without ever fully reaching the public. And that is the danger. A system can become more informed internally while remaining opaque externally, and that is not enough. Question for you. Would you consider it real disclosure if Congress receives classified UAP briefings but the public only gets limited summaries? Tell me in the comments because that distinction may define the next phase of transparency. Now let's move to the third major legislative track, whistleblower protection. The UAP Whistleblower Protection Act has been pushed by lawmakers who argue that people with knowledge of UAP-related programs, records, funding, or incidents need safe ways to report information without fear of retaliation. This is one of the most important parts of the disclosure movement. Why? Because UAP disclosure does not depend only on records. It depends on people, pilots, radar operators, intelligence officials, defense contractors, scientists, program managers, analysts, military personnel, agency staff. People who may have seen something, handled something, processed something, classified something, stored something, briefed someone, or been told not to talk. If those people fear losing their careers, clearances, pensions, reputations, or even legal standing, they may stay silent. That means information continues to remain buried. Whistleblower protections are designed to change that. They create pathways for people to speak to Congress or inspectors general without being punished. At least that is the goal. But UAP whistleblowing is uniquely complicated because the subject may involve classified programs, sensitive compartments, special access programs, national security restrictions, contractor environments, non-disclosure agreements, and alleged information that may be difficult to verify. The line between lawful disclosure and illegal release can be very dangerous. A witness may want to tell the truth, but if the information is classified, they may not be able to speak publicly. They may need a secure channel. They may need immunity. They may need legal protection. They may need Congress to receive the information behind closed doors. That is why whistleblower protection legislation matters. It does not prove the whistleblowers are right. It does not verify every claim. It does not mean every allegation is true. But it makes it more likely that claims can be examined through lawful channels. And that is important because without protected channels, the public receives leaks, rumors, anonymous stories, and only partial claims. With protected channels, Congress may receive testimony, documents, names, dates, program details, funding trails, and specific allegations that can be investigated. That is the difference between noise and oversight. But whistleblower protections also create public expectation. When lawmakers talk about protecting UAP whistleblowers, the public assumes there must be something major behind the scenes. That may be true, or it may be that lawmakers are creating the conditions to find out whether something major does exist. Those are not the same thing. We should not confuse the protection of whistleblowers with confirmation of their claims. A protected witness still needs evidence. A claim still needs verification. A program allocation still needs documentation. A story still needs corroboration. And that is how serious investigation works. But without protection, many claims may never reach the point where they can be tested. So whistleblower legislation is not disclosure itself, but it is a doorway. A lawful doorway into information that may otherwise remain hidden. Now, let's talk about one of the most sensitive areas in this entire issue: defense contractors. Recent oversight activity has included requests for UAP-related records or materials from contractor-linked environments, including concerns that relevant information may exist outside the normal government channels. This is important because the UAP disclosure debate has long included allegations that sensitive material may be hidden not only inside government agencies, but inside private or quasi-private contractor networks. That claim is difficult, it is explosive, and it must be handled carefully. There is a responsible way to frame it. We do not need to assert that contractors are hiding alien technology that would go beyond the public evidence. The responsible question is this: if taxpayer-funded work related to UAP, advanced aerospace systems, recovered materials, sensor analysis, or classified research was placed with contractors, how does Congress ensure those records remain subject to oversight? That is the key issue, because contractors occupy a very complicated space. They may work for government, they may hold classified contracts, they may operate secure facilities, they may develop sensitive technologies, they may store data, they may employ former government personnel, they may be bound by strict secrecy agreements, but they are not the same as public agencies. So if a record, object, analysis, or program moves into a contractor environment, oversight can become much more difficult. Who owns the information? The agency? The contractor? The program office? The classified sponsor? Can Congress compel access? Can the public ever request it? Is it covered by normal records laws? Can it be shielded by classification, proprietary claims, or contract structure? Those questions matter far beyond UAP. They touch the entire relationship between national security and private industry. The modern defense state is not just government offices. It is a network of agencies, commands, laboratories, contractors, subcontractors, data systems, and classified compartments. If UAP-related material exists anywhere in that network, then disclosure legislation must account for the network itself. Otherwise, records can be functionally hidden without being technically destroyed. And that is why contractor focused oversight is so important. It is not just about what the Pentagon knows, it is about where knowledge is stored and who has the legal power to retrieve it. Question for you: should UAP disclosure laws apply only to government agencies, or should they also apply to defense contractors holding taxpayer funded UAP related records or materials? Drop your answer in the comments because this may be one of the biggest loopholes in the entire disclosure debate. Now, let's connect these legislative movements to the current file release environment. The Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP Encounters, known as PURSUE, has created a public-facing release process for UAP records. The official portal describes a government-wide effort to identify, review, declassify, and publicly release unresolved UAP-related records and historical documents. That sounds like exactly what the public has asked for, but again, the details matter. The portal itself acknowledges that many of these are unresolved cases. Unresolved does not mean alien. Unresolved does not mean impossible. Unresolved means the government is unable to make a definitive determination based on the available information. And that may be because of insufficient data, missing context, weak documentation, old records, limited sensor information, or just more broadly, genuine ambiguity. This is one of the most important points the public must understand. Disclosure may reveal uncertainty. It may not reveal certainty. People who expect every file release to contain a smoking gun may be very disappointed, but people who study the system will see something else. They will see how government records are built, how cases are categorized, how evidence is preserved, how little data may exist for some events, how often historical records lack the information needed to resolve a case. That is valuable, but it also shows why legislation matters. Because if the government wants to release meaningful UAP records, it must do more than publish old files. It must create better systems now. Better reporting, better data retention, better sensor integration, better chain of custody, better interagency coordination, better scientific review, better public summaries, and better declassification pathways. The legislative movement should not only focus on the past, it must shape the future, because the next tic tac, the next orb report, the next military intercept, the next unusual radar event, the next restricted airspace incident should not become another fragmented mystery 20 years from now. If a major UAP event happens today, the system should preserve the evidence properly. That is what Congress should be demanding, not just records from the past, a modern standard for the future. Now, what does all this mean for the public? It means 5 key things. First, the UAP issue is becoming more formal. For years, the topics depended on journalists, witnesses, researchers, retired officials, and public pressure. Now, it is increasingly being written into formal government processes. That gives the issue more legitimacy, but it also means the process may become slower, more bureaucratic, and more controlled. Second, Congress is trying to force more oversight. The NDAA provisions, hearings, whistleblower protection efforts, and file requests all suggest lawmakers are not satisfied with vague answers. They want briefings, they want records, they want video files, they want data. They want to know what Arrow has. They want to know what agencies know. They want to know whether the public has been kept in the dark. That is significant. Third, public disclosure may lag behind congressional disclosure. Lawmakers may see more than the public sees that may be necessary in classified environments, but it also creates that trust gap. If Congress says we have seen things but we cannot tell you, public suspicion may increase. The challenge is finding a way to inform the public without compromising legitimate national security. Fourth, whistleblowers may become more important. If records are incomplete or hidden, insiders become key. But whistleblower claims must still be tested. Protection is not proof, it is a process for getting information into lawful review. Fifth, the public must judge outcomes, not headlines. Every new bill, hearing, amendment, portal, or task force should be evaluated by what it produces. Did more records become public? Were the records useful? Were videos released? Was metadata included? Were cases explained? Did Arrow provide clearer reporting? Did Congress receive meaningful briefings? Were whistleblowers protected? Were contractors compelled to cooperate? Was declassification improved? This is how we measure progress, not by excitement, but by the results. Now, let's be honest about the risks. The first risk is performative transparency. This happens when government appears to disclose but releases material that is so incomplete, so redacted, or so poorly contextualized that it does not meaningfully answer public questions. The public gets files, but not clarity. The second risk is overclassification. National security classification is sometimes necessary, but when classification becomes too broad, it can hide mistakes, embarrassment, institutional failure, and public interest information. UAP is especially vulnerable to this because the subject can touch sensors, military operations, intelligence methods, and restricted airspace. The third risk is legislative dilution. Strong disclosure language can be weakened during negotiations. A powerful proposal can become a limited reporting requirement. A public release mandate can become a classified briefing. A records review board can become an internal process. The fourth risk is public overinterpretation. When Congress acts, some people assume it confirms extraordinary claims, even though it does not. Legislation means lawmakers see a need for oversight. It does not automatically validate every theory. The fifth risk is institutional capture. If the same agencies accused of withholding information are also controlling the review and release process, public trust may remain low. That is why independent oversight matters. It's why congressional pressure matters. It's why scientific review matters. And that is why public accountability matters. Now, let's be fair. There are legitimate reasons some information may not be released. Sensor capabilities, military tactics, intelligence sources, foreign adversary data, operational locations, classified technologies, personal privacy, and even ongoing investigations. The public should not assume every redaction is evidence of a cover-up, but the government should not assume every classification decision deserves public trust. Trust must be earned, and the way to earn it is through clarity. Explain what can be released. Explain what cannot be released. Explain why. Release summaries, release metadata where possible, release case categories, release timelines, release methodology. Release enough for the public to understand the process, because secrecy without explanation creates suspicion, and UAP history is already saturated with suspicion. This is why the current legislative moment is so important. It is an opportunity to reset the relationship between the public and the government on this issue, not by promising total disclosure tomorrow, but by building a system that is credible, a system that preserves evidence, protects witnesses, compels cooperation, reduces overclassification, includes scientific review, supports congressional oversight, and gives the public more than just silence. This is what meaningful UAP legislation should do. Now, what should listeners watch next? Watch the NDAA provisions. Do the required briefings happen? Do lawmakers say they are satisfied? Or do they push for more? Watch Arrow. Did it provide clear reportings? Does it acknowledge more cases? Does it explain how it handles intercepts? Watch the House Oversight investigation. Do required videos get released? Do agencies comply? Do lawmakers escalate? Watch whistleblower protections. Are they strengthened? Are witnesses given secure channels? Are claims investigated? Watch contractor oversight. Do private entities cooperate? Do lawmakers push harder? Watch the pulse releases. Are new tranches released regularly? Do they contain meaningful data, or mostly historical fragments? And most importantly, watch that gap. The gap between what is promised and what is delivered, the gap between the Congress sees and what the public sees, the gap between file release and actual explanation, the gap between transparency language and transparent results. This is where the truth of the legislation movement will be found, not in the announcement, in the follow-up through. Final question for you. What would count as a real UAP disclosure for you? Public hearings, classified videos, full case files, whistleblower testimony, contractor records, or a direct government admission? Leave your answer in the comments because the public needs to define what transparency actually means. As we close this episode, let's return to the title, UAP Disclosure, what the latest legislative movements mean for the public. So what do they mean? They mean the UAP issue is no longer stuck outside the walls of power. It is inside the room, inside congressional language, inside defense policy, inside oversight demands, inside whistleblower debates, inside declassification systems, inside national security law. That is historic, but it is also not the finish line. It's just the beginning of a more difficult phase, because once disclosure becomes legislative, the fight becomes more technical, less dramatic, more bureaucratic, less cinematic, more legal, less about belief, more about records, authority, definition, deadlines, enforcement, and classified access. That may sound less exciting than a sudden revelation, but it may be more important because if the public ever receives meaningful answers about UAP, those answers may not come from a single press release. They may come from years of pressure. A photograph in an NDAA, a subpoena, a whistleblower protection statute, a required briefing, a records review process, a contractor compliance letter, a declassification deadline, or finally a preserved sensor file, public report that may finally include enough data to matter. That is how institutional truth often emerges, slowly, imperfectly, under pressure, and this is why the latest legislative moments matter. They do not prove the extraordinary, but they prove the issue is no longer being ignored. They do not guarantee transparency, but they create tools to demand it. They do not solve the mystery, but they may change who has the power to investigate it. And for the public, that is the real story. The question is no longer only what are UAP, the question is will the law finally force the truth into the light? This has been UFO to UAP. I am Matt Tones. If you found this episode valuable, share the show, share it with someone interested in UFO disclosure, UAP disclosure, UAP legislation, ARROW, classified files, whistleblower protection, and government transparency. And remember, disclosure is not just about what is hidden in the sky, it is about whether the systems on the ground can be forced to tell the truth.